The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty streets of Red Rock Valley, a small town nestled between Red Canyon walls that seemed to trap both heat and prejudice within their embrace. The year was 1995, and 12-year-old Ayanna Begay walked home from school with her head down, her long black hair creating a curtain between her and the world that seemed determined to reject her. "There goes the savage girl," whispered Tommy Richardson, the sheriff's son, loud enough for her to hear. His friends snickered, emboldened by his cruelty. "My dad says her people used to scalp white folks." Ayanna's hands tightened around her worn backpack straps. She'd heard worse, much worse, but today felt different, heavier somehow, as if the weight of generations of pain was pressing down on her small shoulders. The town of Red Rock Valley had been built on land that once belonged to the Apache people, though few residents cared to remember that history. The Begay family lived on the outskirts, in a modest trailer that her grandmother had purchased with her meager savings from working as a cleaning lady for the wealthier families in town. "Ayanna, wait up!" The voice belonged to Mrs. Martinez, her 7th-grade English teacher, the only person in the school who seemed to see her as more than just her heritage. "How did the presentation go?" Ayanna turned, her dark eyes reflecting a weariness that no child should carry. "They laughed when I talked about Apache traditions. Someone said we were all just drunks, living off government money." Mrs. Martinez's face tightened with anger and sadness. She knelt down to Ayanna's level, her voice gentle but firm. "You listen to me, Mija. Your culture, your history, it's beautiful and important. These people are afraid of what they don't understand, but that doesn't make them right." As Ayanna walked the remaining blocks home, she passed the town's main street, where local business owners swept their storefronts and chatted with customers. None of them acknowledged her presence. She was invisible until she became inconvenient, and then she was everything they despised. The trailer park where she lived sat in the shadow of the town's water tower, a constant reminder of the division between us and them. Her grandmother, Elena Begay, was tending to her small vegetable garden when Ayanna arrived, her weathered hands coaxing life from the stubborn desert soil. "Shima," Ayanna called, using the Apache word for grandmother. "I'm home." Elena looked up, her eyes immediately reading the pain in her granddaughter's face. At 72, she had survived the government boarding schools that tried to strip away her identity, the relocation programs that scattered her people, and decades of working for families who barely saw her as human. "Come sit with me," Elena said, patting the ground beside her. "Tell me what happened." Ayanna collapsed next to her grandmother, finally allowing the tears to fall. "Why do they hate us so much, Shima? What did we ever do to them?" Elena's gnarled fingers gently stroked Ayanna's hair, a gesture that had comforted countless generations of Apache women. "Fear, my child. They fear our strength, our connection to this land, our refusal to disappear. But hatred is not stronger than love, and love is not stronger than justice." "I don't feel strong," Ayanna whispered. "I feel like I'm drowning." "Your great-great-grandmother was named Ayanna for a reason," Elena said, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality of traditional storytelling. "It means eternal blossom. She survived the cavalry raids, the forced marches, the taking of our children. She survived because she knew that some flowers bloom, even in the harshest winters." That evening, as Ayanna did her homework by the light of a single lamp, she could hear the sounds of the town's Friday night football game echoing across the desert. The cheers and laughter felt like they came from another world, one where she would never belong. But in the quiet of her grandmother's trailer, surrounded by the soft whisper of Apache prayers and the scent of sage, Ayanna made a silent promise to herself. She would not let them break her. She would not let them win. She opened her notebook and began to write, not the assigned essay about what I want to be when I grow up, but something deeper. She wrote about justice, about change, about a future where Apache children wouldn't have to walk home with their heads down. Outside, the desert night was alive with the sounds of coyotes and the rustle of sagebrush in the wind. But inside the trailer, something else was stirring, a determination that would take root in the heart of a 12-year-old girl and grow into something the town of Red Rock Valley could never have imagined. 10 years had passed since that painful night when Ayanna Begay first dreamed of a different future. Now 22, she stood in the hallway of Arizona State University, her graduation cap balanced perfectly on her head, her diploma reading Bachelor of Arts in Political Science summa cum laude. The girl who had once been invisible in Red Rock Valley had become impossible to ignore. Her academic achievements had earned her a full scholarship, and her leadership in student government had caught the attention of professors and political mentors alike. But success hadn't erased the memories. If anything, it had sharpened them. "Ayanna," called Dr. Patricia Hendricks, her constitutional law professor, rushing down the hallway. "I just heard from Senator Martinez's office. They want to interview you for the legislative aid position." Ayanna's heart raced. Working in the state legislature would be her first real step into the political arena, but it also meant staying in Arizona, remaining within reach of the ghosts that still haunted her dreams. "I don't know, Dr. Hendricks," Ayanna said, adjusting her cap nervously. "I was thinking about taking the job offer in Washington, getting as far away from here as possible." Dr. Hendricks studied her with the keen eyes of someone who had mentored many young women through the complexities of ambition and identity. "You know, I grew up in a small town too. Different circumstances, but similar feelings of not belonging. I ran away for 15 years, thinking distance would heal what hurt me." "Did it work?" Ayanna asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "For a while. But eventually I realized I wasn't running towards something. I was running from something. And whatever we run from has a way of following us until we turn around and face it." That weekend, Ayanna drove back to Red Rock Valley for the first time in 2 years. The town looked smaller than she remembered, somehow diminished by her broader perspective. The same Red Canyon walls rose majestically around the valley, but now she saw them not as prison walls, but as ancient guardians that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Her grandmother's trailer had been replaced by a small house, a modest victory that Elena had earned through decades of saving and sacrifice. At 82, Elena moved more slowly, but her eyes still held the fire that had sustained her through 8 decades of struggle. "You look like a leader," Elena said, as Ayanna walked through the door, her voice filled with pride and something else, hope. "I feel like a fraud," Ayanna admitted, sinking into the familiar embrace of her grandmother's arms. "All these years, I've been hiding from who I am, trying to fit into their world." "And now," Elena asked, settling into her favorite chair, the one that faced east toward the sacred mountains, "now I don't know where I belong. I'm too educated for here, too Apache for there, too angry for politics, too hopeful to give up." Elena reached for a small wooden box that had always sat on her kitchen table. Inside were photographs, letters, and artifacts that told the story of their family's survival. She pulled out a black and white photograph of a young Apache woman in traditional dress. "Your great-great-grandmother, the first Ayanna," Elena said. "She was about your age when the cavalry came to take her children to the boarding school. She stood in front of her home with nothing but her courage and refused to let them pass. What happened? They took the children anyway, but she never stopped fighting. She learned to read and write in secret, taught herself English, and eventually became a translator who helped other Apache families navigate the government bureaucracy. She couldn't save her own children from the boarding schools, but she saved dozens of others. Ayana studied the photograph, seeing her own eyes reflected in the face of her ancestor. She worked within the system that oppressed her. She understood that sometimes the only way to change the system is from the inside. It's harder than revolution, requires more patience than rebellion, but it lasts longer. That night, Ayana walked through the streets of Red Rock Valley, seeing it with new eyes. The town had changed. There were more Latino families now, a few African-American residents, even some Apache families who had moved in from the reservation. But the old power structures remained intact, the same families controlling the city council, the school board, the chamber of commerce. She stopped in front of the high school where she had endured so much humiliation. A banner hung across the entrance, home of the Red Rock Warriors. The irony wasn't lost on her. A town that had despised its indigenous residents had appropriated their warrior spirit as a mascot. Ayana Begay? She turned to find a middle-aged white woman approaching. It took her a moment to recognize Lisa Patterson, who had been a year ahead of her in school and had participated in some of the cruelest taunts. "I heard you graduated from ASU," Lisa said, her voice carrying an awkward mix of admiration and guilt. That's really great." "Thank you," Ayana replied, her voice neutral. "I've been thinking about high school. About some of the things we did. I wanted to apologize." Ayana studied Lisa's face, looking for signs of manipulation or political calculation. She found only genuine remorse and the recognition that comes with maturity. "I appreciate that, Lisa. But I'm not the only one who deserves an apology." "I know," Lisa said quietly. "I have kids now, and I'm trying to raise them better, to be better than we were." As Lisa walked away, Ayana felt something shift inside her. The anger that had fueled her for so long was still there, but it was being tempered by something else, a recognition that people could change, that healing was possible, that justice didn't always require revenge. She pulled out her phone and dialed Dr. Hendrick's number. "I'd like to take that interview with Senator Martinez's office," she said, when her mentor answered. "I'm proud of you, Ayana, but more importantly, I think you're finally ready to be proud of yourself." Standing in the shadow of the high school that had tried to break her, Ayana Begay began to plan her return, not as a victim seeking validation, but as a leader preparing to transform the place that had shaped her into the woman she was meant to become. 8 years in the Arizona state legislature had transformed Ayana Begay from an idealistic young aide into a skilled political strategist. Now 30, she had authored legislation protecting indigenous water rights, established programs for rural economic development, and built a reputation as someone who could work across party lines without compromising her principles. But success in Phoenix felt hollow when she thought about the problems festering in her hometown. Red Rock Valley had been struggling economically for years. The copper mine had closed, taking hundreds of jobs with it, and the town's population had dwindled from 8,000 to fewer than 5,000 residents. "You're thinking about running for mayor," said Maria Santos, Ayana's campaign manager and closest friend in the legislature. They were sitting in Ayana's Phoenix apartment, surrounded by policy briefs and constituent letters, planning her next move. "The thought has crossed my mind," Ayana admitted, though she'd been wrestling with the idea for months. "Mayor Jenkins is stepping down after 24 years. The town needs leadership that understands both its history and its future." "It would be political suicide," Maria said bluntly. "You're being talked about for Congress, maybe even the Senate someday. Why would you take a step backward to mayor of a small town?" Ayana walked to her window, looking out at the sprawling Phoenix skyline. In the distance, she could see the mountains that surrounded the valley, the same red rocks that had watched over her childhood, now barely visible through the urban haze. "Because some steps backward are actually steps forward," she said finally. "I've been fighting for rural communities from Phoenix for 8 years. Maybe it's time to fight for one from the inside." The decision became clearer when she received a call from her grandmother. Eleanor, now 85, had been hospitalized with pneumonia. Ayana drove to Red Rock Valley immediately, her heart racing with fear and the familiar dread of returning home. The small hospital hadn't changed much since she was a child. The same flickering fluorescent lights, the same smell of disinfectant and despair. But when she walked into her grandmother's room, she found Elena sitting up in bed, arguing with a young Apache doctor about her discharge papers. "Shima, you need to listen to the doctor," Ayana said, embracing her grandmother carefully. "This young man thinks I'm too old to take care of myself," Elena said with a spark of her old fire. "I told him I was taking care of myself before he was born." Dr. Joseph Yazzie, according to his name tag, looked up at Ayana with recognition. "You're the state representative. I've followed your work on healthcare access for rural communities." "You're from here?" Ayana asked, surprised to find another Apache professional in Red Rock Valley. "I grew up on the reservation, but I've been working here for 2 years. There's a lot of need and not many people willing to serve these communities." After Eleanor was discharged, Ayana found herself staying in Red Rock Valley longer than planned. She walked through the old neighborhoods, noting the boarded-up businesses, the families struggling to make ends meet, the young people with no reason to stay and no resources to leave. She stopped by the community center, where she found a group of Apache women teaching traditional crafts to children, both native and non-native. The program was run by Sarah Crow Feather, a social worker who had returned to the area after college. "We're trying to bridge the gap," Sarah explained, as they watched children work with clay and beads. "Help the non-native families understand our culture. Help our own children take pride in their heritage." "How's the reception been?" Ayana asked. "Mixed. Some of the older residents are resistant, but the younger families are more open. The kids don't care about the old prejudices. They just want to learn and play together." That evening, Ayana attended a town council meeting. The same chamber where she had once been humiliated during a school field trip was now filled with residents debating the town's future. Budget shortfalls, infrastructure needs, the struggling school system, all the challenges that came with a shrinking tax base and limited resources. Mayor Jenkins, now in his 70s, looked exhausted as he fielded angry questions from constituents. The council members, all white, all over 60, seemed overwhelmed by problems that had been decades in the making. "We need new leadership," said Tom Richardson, the former sheriff's son who had tormented Ayana in school. Now, a business owner in his 40s, he had announced his intention to run for mayor, someone who understands the real challenges facing our community. Ayana felt the familiar anger rising in her chest. The same families who had excluded her from their vision of the community were now positioning themselves as its saviors. After the meeting, she was approached by several residents. Some she recognized, others who were new to the area. They had heard about her work in the legislature and wanted to know if she would consider running for mayor. "This town needs someone who understands what it means to be on the outside," said Mrs. Martinez, her old English teacher, now retired but still fighting for social justice. "Someone who can bring people together instead of dividing them." "I'm not sure I'm ready to come home," Ayana said honestly. "Maybe it's not about coming home," Mrs. Martinez replied. "Maybe it's about making a home for everyone who's been left out." That night, Ayana sat with her grandmother on the porch of the small house, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. the same stars that had guided her ancestors across this land for countless generations. "I'm scared, Shima," Ayana admitted. "What if I run and lose? What if I win and can't deliver on my promises? What if they destroy me like they tried to before?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "Your great-great-grandmother once told me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important than fear." What was more important to her? The children who would come after her, the future that would be built on the foundation of her sacrifice. Ayana looked out at the town lights scattered across the valley floor. Somewhere in those houses were children who felt like outsiders, families struggling to make ends meet, dreams deferred by prejudice and poverty. "I think I'm ready to come home," she said finally. Elena smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Then it's time to let that eternal blossom finally bloom." The Red Rock Valley Community Center had never hosted a political rally quite like this one. Nearly 300 people packed into the main hall, a mixture of long-time residents, newer arrivals, and members of the surrounding Apache community who had rarely participated in town politics. The air was thick with tension, curiosity, and the weight of history about to be made. Ayana Begay stood at the podium, wearing a simple blue dress and the silver necklace her grandmother had given her, a piece of Apache craftsmanship that had been passed down through 4 generations. Behind her sat a diverse group of supporters, teachers, healthcare workers, small business owners, and community leaders who had endorsed her campaign for mayor. 30 years ago, I was a little girl who walked these streets with my head down, Ayana began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. I was told that this wasn't my place, that I didn't belong here, that people like me should know our place and stay in it. In the back of the room, Tom Richardson shifted uncomfortably. He had been confident about his own mayoral campaign until Ayana entered the race 3 months ago. Now, looking at the crowd she had drawn, he was beginning to realize that the Red Rock Valley he thought he knew was changing. "But here's what I learned during those years away," Ayana continued. "This is my place. This is our place, all of us. Whether your family has been here for generations or you just arrived last month, whether you're Apache or Mexican or white or black, we all have a stake in this community's future." She gestured to a display board behind her, showing economic development plans, infrastructure improvements, and educational initiatives. "We can spend our energy fighting about who belongs here, or we can work together to build something worthy of our children's future." The crowd erupted in applause, but Ayana could see the skeptical faces scattered throughout the room. Change would not come easily to Red Rock Valley. After the rally, she walked through the town square, shaking hands and listening to concerns. Mrs. Patterson, the mother of Lisa, who had apologized to her years earlier, approached with obvious nervousness. "I want you to know that our family supports you," she said quietly. "Lisa's been volunteering for your campaign, and we believe you're what this town needs." "Thank you," Ayana replied, genuinely moved. "Change is hard, but it's possible when people are willing to do the work." Not everyone was as receptive. At the local diner, she overheard 2 older men discussing her candidacy with barely concealed hostility. "She's not even from here anymore," one said, loud enough for her to hear. "Thinks she can come back and tell us how to run our town." "My grandmother is buried in the cemetery on the hill," Ayana said, turning to face them. "My great-great-grandmother was born on the land where your house now stands." "How much more from here do I need to be?" The men fell silent, but their expressions remained hostile. Ayana had learned not to expect universal acceptance. Progress was measured in hearts and minds changed, not in unanimity achieved. The campaign intensified over the following weeks. Richardson's supporters launched attacks on her record. questioning her commitment to the community and spreading whispers about her radical agenda. But for every attack, Ayana's supporters responded with facts, with testimonials from families she had helped through her legislative work, with evidence of her dedication to rural communities. The breakthrough came during a debate at the high school. Richardson had been pressing her on economic development, arguing that she was too focused on social issues to understand business. "Let me tell you about business," Ayana said, her voice steady but passionate. "I helped bring $50 million in state funding to rural communities like ours. I wrote legislation that created tax incentives for businesses that hire locally. I worked with tribal communities to develop sustainable tourism that respects our cultural heritage while creating jobs." She paused, looking directly at Richardson. "What I haven't done is accept that poverty and division are inevitable. What I haven't done is give up on the people who've been left behind." The audience, filled with high school students, parents, and community leaders, responded with sustained applause. In the back of the room, Ayana spotted several of her former classmates, including some who had once tormented her. Their faces showed a mixture of admiration and something else, recognition that the girl they had tried to diminish had become a woman they could no longer ignore. Election day arrived with an unseasonable rainstorm, the kind that turned the desert into a temporary garden. Ayana voted early, then spent the day visiting polling stations, thanking volunteers and trying to manage her anxiety. That evening, she gathered with her supporters at the community center to wait for results. Elena, now using a wheelchair but still sharp as ever, sat beside her granddaughter as the numbers began to come in. "I'm proud of you, no matter what happens," Elena said, squeezing Ayana's hand. "I know, Shima, but I want to win. Not for me, but for everyone who's been told they don't matter." As the final precincts reported, the results became clear. Ayana Begay had won with 58% of the vote, becoming the first Apache mayor in Red Rock Valley's history. The community center erupted in celebration, but Ayana felt a profound sense of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In her victory speech, she looked out at the crowd, a sea of faces that now included many who had once considered her an outsider. "This victory isn't about revenge," she said. "It's about redemption. It's about proving that a community can grow, can change, can become better than its worst moments." She paused, her voice breaking slightly with emotion. 30 years ago, some of you told me I didn't belong here. Tonight, you've chosen me to lead this community into the future. That's not just a victory for me. It's a victory for the idea that we can choose hope over fear, unity over division, justice over prejudice." As the crowd began to disperse, Tom Richardson approached her. His face showed the strain of defeat, but also something else, a grudging respect. "You ran a good campaign," he said, extending his hand. "I hope you succeed. The town needs success more than it needs my pride." Ayana shook his hand, seeing in his eyes the same recognition she had witnessed in others, that the girl they had underestimated had become a force they could no longer dismiss. Later that night, she stood alone on the steps of City Hall, looking out at the town that had shaped her through both its cruelty and its potential for redemption. The same Red Canyon walls that had once seemed like prison barriers now stood as sentinels, protecting a community that was finally ready to embrace all of its children. In her pocket, she carried the speech she would give at her inauguration next month. It began with words her grandmother had taught her in Apache, then continued in English. "An eternal blossom has taken root in this valley. It will grow in the sunlight of justice and the rain of compassion, creating shade for all who seek shelter and beauty for all who have eyes to see." The girl who had once walked these streets with her head down was now ready to lift up an entire community. The reckoning was complete, but the real work was just beginning.